there were about to be a wave of companies that needed building because there were these big technological shifts happening on Bitcoin that would allow a huge wave of innovation. So then we were like, wow, this is a huge opportunity and a huge need that founders would need, not just capital, but also really professional support. We invest not just capital, we're really supporting the founders in a really deep way when we do invest as well. Okay, why am I here? Like, what am I supposed to be doing in the world? To understand that, I need to understand, like, well, why are humans here? Like, if I'm part of humanity, like, why are humans? Why is life? Why does life exist? Like, and then you're like, okay, well, why does the world exist? Then you're like, why does the universe exist? I think why did the universe exist is a very complicated question that I have no insight into, but why life exists for me is sort of like this way that consciousness gets to experience itself. So then we think about Satoshi creating Bitcoin and then anonymously and leaving as sort of this ultimate act of ego death. There was no ego involved. He wanted nothing from it. Like he's never, extracted a Satoshi from his savings. And I think that's, there's something that's so special about Bitcoin that can't be replicated.
Here's an idea for you. Come and see me and Luke in Prague, my favorite European city.
With over 100 world-class speakers and the chance to meet more than 100 leading Bitcoin companies, this is where ideas flourish, connections are made, and Bitcoin's path forward is forged together with 10,000 enthusiasts and professionals.
In Prague, people have been fighting for freedom since forever. So it's only natural that Prague is the Bitcoin capital of Europe. You should be there.
With 3 days of keynotes, panels, and side events, BTC Prague is the place to be for pure Bitcoin-only signal.
And the beer is just fantastic.
Use discount code FREEDOM for 10% off your ticket and another 5% discount if you pay with Bitcoin.
So remember, use code FREEDOM and see you in Prague.
Andi, welcome to the Freedom Footprint Show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, hi Andi. Good to see you. You're back in Australia now, I guess, right?
No, I live in Austin, in Texas.
In Austin. Okay. So we'll since I got that wrong, we should do the TLDR on Andi Pitt. Will you tell our listeners and us who you are and what you do, please?
Well, the reason I am from Australia. I grew up in Australia, and we met at the Bitcoin conference in Sydney last year. So that's makes sense why you were thinking I live in Australia. I was
Correct.
there for so it was really great timing to be able to join that conference. I have a background in traditional finance. I was with Goldman Sachs for around 8 years. Starting in Australia in mergers and acquisitions, leveraged finance, and then moved to New York where I sat on the trading floor in a principal investing role, doing a lot of structuring really interesting transactions, really all around the world across a variety of different industries. I was always passionate about emerging markets, really saw that there was something very broken with how the global system works. And so that was really, always what I wanted to do. And I just sort of ended up staying at Goldman a lot longer maybe than I expected. And so I left, I ended up traveling, taking quite a long sabbatical, kind of working on a startup in the middle, failing at my startup. Now it's sort of, merging it into another company, which now I'm advising on, which is awesome. And then, co-founded the fund Ego Death Capital along with Jeff Booth and Nikolai Lechuga as the founding general partners a little over 2 years ago now, really with this excitement around what was going on in Bitcoin and Bitcoin being this solution to, so many huge problems that I had always been passionate about, and bring sort of the different expertise that we could then really support those companies that would be building out the infrastructure to create, the system that we really wanted to see in the world. So we were very lucky to be joined by our advisors, Lynn Alden, Preston Pish, and Pablo Fernandez on the first fund. They really trusted us. We're very grateful and have absolutely loved working with them. We're currently raising our second fund, and Lynn and Preston are both joining us as general partners in that second fund. And then we also have Lisa Naygood, aka Nifty Nay. She's joining as an advisor, technical advisor to the second fund. She's awesome. All of our team is awesome. So yeah, really love getting to work on what we get to work with, get to support amazing companies and just support these founders that are really like the ones bringing that vision to life.
Yeah. So what kind of companies are Ego Death looking to invest in?
We invest in companies that are building a Bitcoin only, so investing in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And companies, it's the software application layer. So we're not investing in any mining companies. We would consider mining services, technology for mining, but we really specialize the fund in these software applications. And it's really then any company that's contributing in some way to the Bitcoin ecosystem with technology, helping people, providing, ways that people can buy or use Bitcoin. So for instance, We have a company called Relay out of Europe, and they're helping people in Europe to buy Bitcoin. Or it's like companies that maybe are using Bitcoin in a really innovative way as well. Or it's a way that's like, so it's sort of contributing to Bitcoin or using Bitcoin in some way.
And where did you get the idea from? Like how did what are the origins of ego death? How did the things start forming in your brain? Like where did it come from?
Yeah, so Nico and I had been friends for quite a while, and I was on sabbatical. I was thinking about what to do next, and basically Nico and I started talking about working on something together. And then he's known Jeff for many years, Jeff Booth. So he was quite good friends with Jeff, and he and Jeff had been talking about what's going on in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Jeff had been much deeper in the Bitcoin ecosystem than us. And both of us, Nico, had this deep passion for emerging markets. We had known Bitcoin for many years. And so then sort of the three of us started talking about what was going on in the Bitcoin ecosystem, how these companies, Jeff had this insight of this building that was really about to happen, that there were about to be a wave of companies that needed building because there were these big technological shifts happening on Bitcoin that would allow a huge wave of innovation and building to happen. And so then what we did from there, so then we were like, wow, this is a huge opportunity and a huge need that founders would need, not just capital, but also really professional support for those. And so we constructed a team basically that would be able to raise the funding we needed and then really support those founders as well. So we invest not just capital, we're really supporting the founders in a really deep way when we do invest as well.
What is the main difference of working with this as compared to working for Goldman and Sachs?
I mean, the biggest difference from my day-to-day is, and high level, is really I'm working with early stage founders who have this like big idea, this like they're really excited and they want to bring this vision to life. So we're investing in really people. It's investing in a small group of co-founders typically. And it's so, okay, yes, it's a company, but really it's working closely with these, really ambitious, excited, creative founders and really supporting them from that very early stage to growing. Versus what I was doing at Goldman was really working with very big established companies. So, anything from like SoftBank to really big companies in emerging markets. And there it's just a really different thing. You're helping them improve their financing, but it wasn't really like helping to build something. I wasn't really like I didn't really feel like I was necessarily contributing that much. It was like, okay, yes, I was helping these companies to improve in how they were operating, but I wasn't really like, I think it's much more exciting to be supporting young founders, and you can really see this, you're supporting them to grow from basically from nothing to something really incredible. And then it's much more meaningful for me. Like I just couldn't work anymore doing something that I didn't feel was like really contributing in a positive way to the world. That was just like, it was just kind of soul destroying, to be quite honest. So now it's like, I really feel like what we're doing is supporting something that's so important for the world to exist. And it's like, how do we each contribute in our own way to that? And so I feel like this is how I can contribute to kind of Bitcoin effectively.
Yeah, and Jeff talks about like seeing things from the lens of the world that is to come, or like you can choose how much you already live in on a Bitcoin standard or in a hyper Bitcoinized world, right? It's sort of personal. So from EcoDeath's perspective, how much like do you denominate in sats, for instance, when you look at a contract or anything really? Like how do you view the world from a company perspective?
I think there's like a difference between looking forward and being practical around the reality of today. And if we were to say, oh, we live in a Bitcoinized world, that's sort of delusional. I think what Jeff is talking about much more is like looking forward and doing what we can to get to that point. But the reality is that, most of the founders we invest in, their expenses of their company are mostly denominated in fiat. So a founder that's living in Lisbon, Portugal, is paying his rent in fiat, is paying his children's school fees in euros, and so the reality is that most founders, at least sort of their life expenses, and so their salaries for the engineers and everyone has to be at least a majority in fiat. But then what then makes sense is, we all typically like might save a portion of our salaries and retain a portion. So there's like a transition over time where now people don't want to save in fiat. So their day-to-day expenses, part of their income maybe has to be in fiat, but then part of it now can go into Bitcoin because that's actually what people want to save in. So I think that's like the start of the transition. And then over time, as you see hyper-Bitcoinization, then maybe those, the base case of expenses gets denominated in in Bitcoin. But for now, what we're doing is effectively investing fiat currency into companies. And there are a few reasons for that. One is just from a practical perspective, these early stage companies, their expenses are in fiat. But over time, as they're generating Bitcoin revenues, whether it's Bitcoin linked or just directly in Bitcoin, they put more and more of their treasury into Bitcoin. So if you are a founder and you have your expenses denominated in fiat and you have a Bitcoin treasury, that opens you up to so much risk. But over time, as you have revenues, it balances out. And so it's sort of this like gradual curve that companies can shift to a Bitcoin standard over time as they're generating Bitcoin linked revenue. So as we're seeing all of these companies start to do that, it's sort of like I guess it's like a flywheel almost, that more and more people are saving Bitcoin, the companies are earning Bitcoin, and then it creates more Bitcoin usage over time. So that's sort of how we see it. But we invest in companies that we think basically have the ability to outperform Bitcoin. So we're thinking about the sort of hurdle rate as being Bitcoin, which is an insanely high hurdle rate. But that's how our founders have to think, that if they're not able to beat the Bitcoin hurdle rate with the growth in their company, then, they should really just be holding treasury or investing in Bitcoin. So that's what we're really looking for in our companies as well.
Yeah, and that's really, really hard. I mean, what would that be? Well, it would be something in Bitcoin and something earning Bitcoin probably. But yeah, that hurdle it's going to change everything. And some people are fearful that will slow down the economy. I don't think so personally. I think it's just more honest, and that we'll see there are no zombie companies on a Bitcoin standard. It's just more truthful. But that also means that to outperform Bitcoin, you have to provide something of real value.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, what we've seen is, a lot of venture capital has gotten a little over its skis, I would say. There's been so much funding put into companies that just don't make sense, so much wasted funding. And then it's a whole extra story in the crypto VC world, which is not even VC. I wouldn't even call it venture capital, but that's a whole different story. So I think founders in the Bitcoin ecosystem, and we encourage this, as being very, very diligent, very thoughtful. We're not investing in companies that maybe have the potential to have revenue in 5 years' time. It's like, no, what's like the business model? How are you going to get there? And that's really what we want to see from a pretty early stage. And so, founders are diligent. We're having this world where some of our companies are cash flow positive, like profitable at the seed stage, and with the sort of super high growth metrics that you would expect as well from a seed stage company. And that's I think quite unique. Not all of our companies, we have from a portfolio construction perspective, some that really have revenue today and some that are more like moonshots. But, from a venture perspective, we are looking for the companies that can have the potential to contribute in a really material way to the Bitcoin ecosystem. And for our investors, that means, if they have the potential to return like 100x. And so Bitcoin, I think it's unlikely that Bitcoin does 100x in the next 10 years. You never know, but as compared to fiat, like let's see what happens in the fiat world. As compared to some currencies, it certainly will do 100x, but compared to the US dollar, but that's what we're looking for in companies.
I've talked to Jeff about this a lot, like what this implies and what it could possibly mean for the future. So the first instinctive thing is to think that, like, okay, so running a profitable Bitcoin company, like denominated in Bitcoin, is really, really hard. But then you get into the other thing, which is so fascinating, that free market competition. There's like a new level of competition that doesn't even have to be competition on Bitcoin, because Bitcoiners are incentivized to help one another, and so are Bitcoin companies. we all benefit from each other proper Bitcoin company. So one thing happening in Bitcoin over here helps everyone else in Bitcoin every other part of the world. So we're and the companies in particular are incentivized to like help one another. And I can feel like we've seen this through the years being in the space, that more and more people are leaning into that, and instead of seeing one another as competitors, just starting to help one another. Well, like the Madeira conference, for instance, and BTC Prague and Honey Badger in Riga, all of those three conferences seem like they don't see each other as competition at all. They see each other as complementary to one another. And like, I look forward to that kind of future so much, because I think that's one of the most beautiful aspects of this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's like there are huge problems with having an underlying monetary system that is corrupted, that's inflationary, that's unfair. And we don't really see that in a very tangible, obvious way in our society on like normal day-to-day, year-to-year. But what we do see is, okay, well, let's look what happens when you have hyperinflation. And people are all of a sudden really struggling, having to compete. This creates enormous scarcity. It just destroys society so quickly. And so if you think about like that being a super magnified version of what we have in our underlying system, and so we have that going on in a smaller way every year, but over 10, 20, 50 years, that just creates this culture of competition effectively, because everyone has this scarcity, because everyone's just like on, the hamster wheel trying to like keep up with the world, with inflation, with asset price inflation. And so I think that, that's definitely the thesis, that if you don't have corruption and in your underlying monetary system, that it could completely change the way people interact with each other. If people no longer have a scarcity mindset, if they have a currency they can actually store their wealth in, and they're not constantly having to preserve that and figure out how to preserve it and invest and make more. And so I feel like that definitely comes across into Bitcoin. Now, from a practical perspective, if you are building a company in the Bitcoin space, there might be competition in your space, and that is going to be competitive. But I think what's really different here is the share. It's not like there's a fixed pie and everyone's is trying to like get a piece of it, and it's a zero-sum game. Like, it's not a zero-sum game in Bitcoin. The pie is growing, and if everyone is contributing, so if you have like, 5 different, let's talk about like, Swan and River are 2 big US companies which help people buy Bitcoin in the US. Like, if each of them are bringing Bitcoin to new people, then that whole pie is growing. And so they're helping each other, and they're not necessarily, and there is a degree of competition, but there's a degree to which each of them are sort of like growing their worlds and their buyers. And so actually, I think that's being part of like a rising tide of something means that there is inherently less requirement to be competitive, and people can then really contribute and help each other. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think we're definitely seeing that in the Bitcoin space.
Yeah, this whole notion of the economy being a zero-sum game is like one of the bigger lies ever told. Like, it's I think that's why people have the see like the evil Uncle Scrooge type capitalist as the bad guy. It's because of this flawed conception of that being rich always has to be at the expense of someone else, which is simply not true. It's only true if you acquired your wealth through illicit means, including inflation. So when you live in a system that is inherently untruthful and wrong, ethically wrong and immoral, then that's what happens. Then people will see the capitalist as the bad guy, and they're partially right, since that's what's going on. Like, the winners are the ones who know how to play this very skewed kind of game.
I mean, I think it's true. I think one thing I have observed is, like, everyone's trying to do what they think is right at the end of the day. Like, I think there are very few people in the world, I mean, for sure, some that are really out there to be terrible people. Like, most people, by far the majority, genuinely think that what they're doing is the right thing, or that maybe they don't think about it. And yeah, they're trying to build build wealth for their family. They're trying to support their family. And the best way that they know how to do that is by working in a big corporation or by running a big corporation. And maybe that corporation happens to be close to the money printer, or there's lobbyists, like, and then you get in this system where people, work for a company, and like the way that they're rewarded, the whole system is incentivized that these people, the best way that they can be successful, which is what society expects, is for them to work really hard in that company and do the best thing to maximize the shareholder returns of that company. But the whole system is like pushing them into that because, you have pension funds. Well, it's like really, you have like big investors, let's call it BlackRock, that like are expecting these companies to have shareholder returns. And so then the people inside the board of directors, the CEO, okay, all they need to do is constantly grow profits. And that's like their one thing that they have to do. And so, okay, we can demonize them, like the CEO of a major company, for taking a big salary and, pushing growth at all costs. Okay, but why is he doing that? Let's demonize BlackRock because they own all of the equity and they're the ones that are like putting the shareholder. Okay, but who's pressure on BlackRock? Like BlackRock, okay, they're high net worth, or they actually have pension funds that like mums and dads invest in, that they need the returns because the whole system is inflationary. And so I think it's easy to demonize people, but I just see everyone as a sort of like a product of that system in one way or another.
Yeah. And this is something I debate with other Bitcoiners a lot, because like I totally agree. I think it's an effect of how the system is constructed from the beginning. And I don't even buy that the founders of the Federal Reserve were thinking that they were doing something evil either, or like they probably thought they were doing the right thing. It's just that it was impossible to see that far into the future what the end result or what the long-term effects of this kind of system would be. Just as I think like a democracy is sort of like that. It looks very good on paper, but is it inevitable? This is something I struggle with. Is it inevitable that every democracy turns into a totalitarian state after X amount of hundreds of years, or tens of years or whatever? I think the pace may differ, but there's something inherently flawed about all of our systems when we have this kind of corrupt money in the base layer. It's probably all inevitable, all the bad shit that comes with it.
I mean, it might be base, but there's other inherent problems. Like even so, I guess I think you have to like separate democracy from elections. So just because a country has elections doesn't mean it's democracy. Like the US is not a democracy. Like if you actually look into it, like most countries. And it's like, I think the bigger question, well, at least how I totally agree with you, and how I sort of frame it is like, is it actually possible to have a democracy? Because if you did have a perfect democracy, then theoretically that could continue. But the problem is like, I don't know that that's possible. And so even if you look at like voting theory, so like if you look at kind of a microeconomics, like a mathematical model of voting theory, there is no perfect voting system. So there is no perfect voting system that will accurately reflect the views of the population every time. So different countries have different structures to try and overcome this. In the US, you have state by state, you have the president, which is very flawed. In say, certain countries like Egypt, you'll have runoff elections. So you'll have like 50 candidates, and then the top like two get selected for a runoff. But even then, mathematically, like it doesn't guarantee, because people split the vote. Like you could have 3 candidates out of the 5 in the first election that represent the same thing. They split the vote, and therefore the other 2 go through. So just mathematically, there's actually no perfect way to have elections reflect the population. Other countries like Germany will do proportional representation of democracy. Once you get above a certain threshold, you have representation in the parliament. And then you get into all the factors of that. But I think, and then in the US, we have parliamentary voting. In Australia, we have something similar, but in the US, each individual senator or congressman or congresswoman would vote individually on each piece of legislation. In Australia or the UK, and I'm not sure how it is in European countries, you vote as a party. Like it's very, very uncommon. It's almost unheard of for anyone to vote against the party. So if we think about how that works in practice, in the US, each individual person is deciding whether or not they're going to vote for a piece of legislation, which it's like, how do you design a system for maximum corruption, right? Because then they're like looking at their own interests for every single one, bargaining on every single piece of legislation that comes through. And so then you just get these like crazy pieces of legislation passed, like the Inflation Reduction Act, that people just add on and add on and add on, and it just becomes a total mess. Whereas in Australia, like there are benefits and cons and pros of like pros and cons of both systems, but at least in Australia, I think there is corruption, but it's less because you would have to basically corrupt an entire party effectively, or a majority of the party. Your interests would have to align with a majority of the party for that party to kind of want that to come into force. Because if the party doesn't agree with what the leader is doing, they actually can just vote him out in between elections. So it's very much like it's just a little more check and balance on at least that one particular aspect of what might corrupt a democracy.
I don't know how it is in other European countries, but I think it's kind of similar. But from my experience is from the Swedish system, where it's very much like that. It's very uncommon that people go against the party line. But it's not as if you have to bribe the entire party. You could just bribe the leadership of the party, which is usually very centralized and very bribable, as it seems anyway. So I think. There's a lot of like virtue signaling and stuff going on from this leadership position. So I think we get. I view corruption in different countries as like it exists everywhere, but it's just the different layers of society where you might have to bribe the police officer on the street in Mexico, but if you go to Scandinavia, you have to bribe someone higher up the hierarchy, and it's more expensive to bribe them, but the bribes are still there. So what system is more, fair and truthful? Well, up for debate, I guess. But and then you have the other inherent flaws of democracy. It's not just only that it doesn't make, like voting theory and mathematics, that it doesn't make sense, but also the morality of like four people. If 5 people vote, 4 of them could vote for beating up the 5th guy, and that's like it's still wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So you come into libertarian theory and property rights and stuff, and it's very hard to square democracy with that, with property rights at the end of the day. So, but I'm not claiming I have any answers here what to do about it, except just increase your freedom footprint and get some more money, or I mean, Bitcoin. Get some more money is probably a good idea too. But get your hands on some Bitcoin and try to live your life your own way. Use the tools you have, and do the jurisdictional slalom if you can.
I mean, one thing I do find useful is like talking to people about the ideas we talk about in Bitcoin, but not in a preachy dictation way. It's like when invited, or, maybe discussing lightly something that someone might find, I don't know, with my family, like if I just go and, talk about Bitcoin, I've lost them. But, there are certain aspects of it that actually really resonate. And so sort of helping, because people like inherently, I think it's a human nature thing, like one way or another, quite close-minded. It's like a natural thing over time, an evolutionary perspective, that, people end up seeing the world in a fixed way that is effectively in line with their peer group. And so helping this, I think like just creating like little cracks in maybe the way that they see the world and opening minds a little bit. I think that's like what at least where I'm at. Who knows? But right now, that's kind of where I'm at, of like, just like getting people to maybe like question their assumptions a little bit, just to like loosen up maybe some of those really fixed views that are held.
Absolutely. And that's how you do it, because you like going full on, becoming a full on like Bitcoiner, you will alienate people, and you will spend less time with your old friends. That just comes with the thing, because you have less in common if you view the world differently. And I've seen it happen firsthand, and hopefully poking holes in their narratives and cracks, as you say, in their a little crack here and there in the mirror through which their worlds are reflected through. Strange sentence, but that's probably how you get there.
I think that's a really great way to phrase it, actually.
We're thrilled to introduce our new sponsor, the BitBox02 Bitcoin Only Edition.
Bitbox.
It's fully open source, Swiss engineered, and Bitcoin only, forever. The device only supports Bitcoin, which means less code, less attack surface, and improved security for your Bitcoin. Check out the BitBox02 Bitcoin Only Edition at bitbox.swiss/freedom.
And use code freedom for 5% off.
We're now partnered with the Bitcoin Advisor, your best choice for collaborative multi-sig custody. The Bitcoin Advisor guides you every step of the way, from taking self-custody of your Bitcoin to securing it in their multi-sig vaults. Estate planning and inheritance is built in, so your loved ones can have peace of mind.
And you know what the best part is? Me and Luke are Bitcoin advisors. So you can contact us. We can advise you about Bitcoin and Bitcoin custody, how to make custard, anything really. We're Bitcoin advisors.
So visit us at thebitcoinadvisor.com/freedom or send us a DM or email to get started.
Contact us within 2 weeks and we'll throw in a free set of steak knives. Maybe.
The show is also sponsored by Orange Pill app, the Bitcoin-only social network where you can stack friends who stack sats. Make local connections and find all the nearby meetups, see what's going on in your area, and connect with Bitcoiners around you. And now, with a brand new merchant section, it's easier than ever to find and connect with local businesses that accept Bitcoin.
The best part about Orange Pill app is that you know that it's high signal because you're paying for Orange Pill app, and so is everyone else. There are no Asian ladies asking you how your trade is going on Orange Pill app because it's not a trading app. It's a dating app. Is it a dating app?
So download the Orange Pill app on Apple or Android, send us a DM, and start building your local network of Bitcoiners. Here, maybe I'll jump in now to slightly take the topic a little bit different direction. You mentioned that you got into Bitcoin in sort of more in your life because it aligned with some things that you found important. But can you explain how you found Bitcoin and how you came to the realization that it did those things?
Yeah, so I first came across Bitcoin probably in 2017. I was sitting on the trading floor at Goldman in New York and everyone was talking about Bitcoin. It was the 2017 bull run. And I was like, what is this thing? I remember I think there was a guy on the floor that made so much and he just quit and bought a house in the Hamptons and just retired. And everyone was like, wow, okay, that's kind of cool. But also jealous. I wish I'd done that. Not I wish, but that's what people were saying. So that's when that was a very strong memory I have. And then I left Goldman in 2018. I ended up actually spending a lot of time in Europe and specifically Berlin with a lot more of the crypto community. So a lot of the, people that were much more involved in Ethereum, in altcoins. And there was talking so many interesting use cases, but I was just highly skeptical. And I was I don't really think these use cases make sense. For instance, because I've been a student of emerging markets, democracy, governance, corruption. And so people were saying, okay, well, we can use the blockchain for transparency in government. And I'm I don't think the problem is a lack of ability to be transparent. It's the lack of want to be transparent. Governments can publish what they spend. You don't need technology for that. But do governments want to do that? No. And so there was just I saw so much noise and I didn't really get to the Bitcoin narrative at that point in time. I didn't really understand it. People I was with were not Bitcoiners. They were crypto people. And then I'd left Goldman. I was totally burnt out. I was I don't want to think about finance ever again. I'm just going to go and travel and live in the forest and write. Anyway, long story short, I ended up, it was really, I guess, in sort of the last few years, really talking a lot to Jeff and Nico, and that whole conversation we started to have around the fund, and then really realizing, I think that's what really got me, was realizing that Bitcoin was this, potential solution to all of these things that I had been so passionate about for such a long time. And then I think it was really during the pandemic also that opened my eyes a lot to, I'd always looked at governance and corruption and blah, 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 as an emerging market phenomenon. that's what I've been studying. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Paul Collier. There's a great book, Wars, Guns, and Votes, which is very influential in my sort of journey around, it's called Democracy in Dangerous Places. It's really looking at basically what does quote unquote democracy look like in Africa. And it's not democracy, long story short. And then it was really in 2020 that there was this outrageous things happening in the world. And I was like, wait, I think all of that narrative is also, I think all of that applies to the countries I live in as well, like the US and Australia, which was like, wait, what? It was such a like a light bulb moment for me. And so I think those two factors of seeing then Bitcoin really solving a problem for emerging markets, but also over a longer term, you know, these deep structural issues we have in the West as well. And I think the third factor is the environmental point. So I'm, you know, deeply passionate about the environment. Like, it horrifies me that we cut down old growth forests. I love hiking, camping, you know, being in nature so much, and just seeing this destruction globally of what's going on. And it's driven by this ever increasing consumption. And it's horrifying to me just seeing the amount of consumption and waste that we have in the world. And it's just like, it's so out of harmony with how the world should operate, and with how like a society and a people in harmony with nature are ultimately a happy and, you know, thriving, functioning society. And we're not. And why is that? And so for me, then, you know, I guess that was a really another thing that I really resonated with around the you know, what people talk about in Bitcoin of this inflationary monetary system driving ever increasing consumption that is just not sustainable. And that's ultimately what's destroying our planet. And, you know, things being way cheaper than they should be because we're on borrowed money and borrowed time. And so, yeah, that's I think it's interesting because so many environmentalists are against Bitcoin, and, you know, certain interest groups have done a great job of creating a narrative that Bitcoin is bad for the environment. And I think that's actually really sad. And I really want to see that change, because to me, it's like actually this root cause of the problem in our monetary system today. That was a long answer.
No, that's. I mean, I love all the other arguments for why Bitcoin is good for the environment. That you can like use it as a suspension mechanism for energy that would otherwise have been wasted, and you can put power plants in remote locations as long as you have a mining rig. All of this great stuff. But the real core thing that I seldomly hear argued for is like, but the really big thing here is that it's anti-consumerist. Like, you will sell all your shares and only like at some point you come to this, that which you can do without your own insight, where you're not a materialist anymore. You don't crave a ton of shit. You'll owe nothing and be happy. That's the ultimate. That's where the vectors are pointing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all just want to like get back to a life where we live like in a little cottage in nature and have family and community around us. And that's like, and we have a purpose and we work, and that's ultimately what makes us happy. Yeah. But it's kind of crazy that's a privilege now reserved for like the few rich people that can afford it.
Yeah. It's clown world. Everything's upside down. So your bio here on Ego Death Capital says poet and consciousness explorer. I guess this is adjacent topics to this, living in harmony with nature and everything. Can you give us a little more about that, please?
Sure. People don't normally pick up on this. I love it. Where to start? I think... Yeah, I guess I went on what could be called a spiritual journey over the time after I left Goldman. I think that's a little cliched term, so I don't love to use it, but it is relatively accurate. I also I grew up sort of in my younger years in a I guess a spiritual community in Sydney as well. So there was this kind of somehow imprinted on me in some way or another. We left that, so I wasn't involved in that for most of my life, but it is sort of the way I was raised for the early years of my life. And I think most of us on a day-to-day basis, we're working, we have a family, and we don't necessarily have the time to like deeply contemplate the nature of existence. but I was really lucky and privileged to be able to explore that and to take time off work at a relatively young age and be able to just spend time, deeply contemplating that question and learning from, some of the deepest spiritual traditions in the world. Particularly, I spent time up in northern India, in Dharamshala or in the Himalayas, studying Buddhism. Not a huge amount of time, but it was very, very transformative. The time I had there, that was some of the happiest I've been, talking about like having no possessions. Like they took our phones away from us, everything. Had a tiny little cell, like it was literally like a tiny bedroom with like one little bed, and that was it. And it was like amazing. It's just like so great. But I think and then when you start learning from all the different deep spiritual traditions, there's this big difference between the core mystical truths of a religion that I view as effectively the same, and maybe what gets expressed and brought out into what you would call a religion with rituals and rules, and is sort of then separated from you as having that, universal source or God or whatever you want to call it inside you. And so I think as I've had the time to sort of experience and understand, a variety of wisdom traditions, indigenous traditions from around the world, and spiritual, it's sort of a conclusion I've come to, if I can call it that.
I mean, my spiritual journey, I would say Bitcoin played a big part of it. I've done a bit of meditation and spent quite some time trying to learn more about myself. And I'm not a religious person by any stretch of the imagination. But what I can say is whenever you're in a creative process and you're creating something, whether it's a text or a song, and you really feel like you're in the moment creating something, especially in a live environment when you're jamming music with people or something, it does feel like the song or whatever is not in your head but in the room around you, and that you're channeling something. And writing can feel like that too. I don't believe that's the case. I believe that is just tapping into your unconscious or your subconscious mind, but it certainly feels like it's an outside force. So that's what I can say about that, I guess. What are your thoughts?
I mean, for most deep spiritual traditions would say that effectively every human being is an incarnation of the universal source. So in Hinduism, I have to remember, but Brahma is basically the universal source, universal consciousness, and then the Atman is effectively the individual incarnation of that. And so we are all effectively connected. We're all just part of this universal experience of the world, and that each of us are effectively the universe become conscious. That if you, this deep thinking of okay, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing in the world? And then it's well, to understand that, I need to understand well, why are humans here? If I'm part of humanity, why are humans? Okay. Then if I need to understand that, well, okay, why is life? Why does life exist? And then you're okay, well, why does the world exist? Then you're why does the universe exist? So it's you keep coming back. I think why did the universe exist is a very complicated question that I have no insight into, but why life exists for me is sort of this way that consciousness gets to experience itself. It's almost if someone if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? Well, it doesn't if there's no one there to hear it. And so if the universe actually, it's this way of the universe experiencing itself. And so each of us is sort of on this journey in life of consciousness, through being able to sort of simultaneously be aware of the universal consciousness at the same time being the universal consciousness. And that's a very, very difficult journey to tread because of, a whole variety of kind of evolutionary biology perspectives, the process of becoming conscious. So an animal, right, they're generally pretty happy. They just live in the world. I have squirrels here. They just love, they play. But are they deeply aware of themselves? No. And so that process of that jump in consciousness to becoming conscious is inherently painful and complicated, and that's what creates a lot of like the human suffering. As the Buddhists would say, suffering is inherent in life, in the nature of our existence. But I think that's the journey we're on, is to be able to just experience it deeply and experience everything that comes and not get attached and not rejecting things and just being in the flow. And then I think when you can do that, you have these moments like what you said of creativity, where you're just purely in that flow. You're purely in that pure expression of consciousness. There's nothing, there's no thoughts, there's no preconceptions, there's no fear, there's no judgment getting in the way. You're able to just like simply be and simply express. And I think a lot of musicians, creatives, entrepreneurs like have that experience. And for me, my journey is like, how do I actually be in that all day, every day? And you get knocked out, like, but it's like, how can I live the life that is like naturally springing up within me? And there's a great quote from Hermann Hesse, who's a German author. He wrote Siddhartha, but this quote is from Demian, and I have to remember it, but it's I think it's something like, all I was doing was trying to live the life that was welling up within me. Why was that so difficult? And that resonates to me so much. It's like, why is it so difficult? It's like, anyway, it's kind of like the journey I'm on right now, at least.
Fascinating. I mean, I've had such great conversations with Jeff about stuff like this before, so it's fascinating to hear your perspective on it. Absolutely. And yeah, as you say, we are the universe experiencing it itself to a certain extent, and we can't. I mean, the molecules in our body, the atoms, some of them are born. Well, most of them, all of them, are born when stars explode. Like, and the really heavier elements need a really big star to explode, and then those atoms get scattered around the universe, and they make up what we are. So we are literally the stuff of stars. And I find this very fascinating, the whole, like, to which extent the mind creates reality, and to which extent there is an objective reality, and if the whole objective subjective dichotomy is false, if that's also something where our brains created to make order out of chaos, because we have no way of knowing. And there are so many other theories, like for instance, there's three theories I love about this. One is the meme theory of everything, which is a way of explaining the Fermi paradox, which I'm sure you know of, why we don't hear about from other life forms. And that is simply because they're too far away, so our minds can't sync with them. So what we experience, what we call reality, is simply where our consciousnesses collide, all beings on Earth. And would also explain why it's harder to understand a lobster than it is to understand another human being, and even harder to understand an insect. And I'm not sure that what you said, that other species don't have this consciousness thing. I mean, whales and stuff have been observed to, at least what we engage in, at least what we think is deep thinking, and, you know, committing suicide and stuff, which is sort of requires a self-reflection, I guess, even that, though that's not a happy thought. The other idea is that consciousness is just one of the constants in the universe, and that we're just tapping into something that is already there. And it's like a base layer, like one of the dimensions. And the third theory is just from this is much more hands-on thing about space and time being connected in the way that Einstein predicted. So we know that time flows in different speeds in different places in the universe, which means we do experience it subjectively. I mean, here locally on Earth, the differences are so small, so that we don't really see it. But it could be that for at least a certain time period, the universe is already deterministic. So it's deterministic on a short scale, but non-deterministic on a longer scale, if that makes any sense. Because you could sort of, if you cut through the nature of space-time, you add space to the three dimensions, so it becomes a cross-section. So a cross section of a 4-dimensional thing, what would that look like? And could that be like the true representation of time? I'm rambling here, but yeah, I love exploring these topics, and I can't stop thinking about them. It's wonderful.
I mean, I think a couple, like on the animal thing, I totally agree with you. I think there are certain animals that potentially, for sure, animals have feeling, they have emotion, they have personality. Like my question about animals, even like dolphins, for instance, are known to like take drugs. Like they will get a pufferfish and they will pass the pufferfish around, like male teenage dolphins, because it's been an like puts them in an altered state of consciousness. And there's videos and the dolphins are just like floating like this. It's hilarious. And you see family bonding, you see love, you see mourning, you see pain, like the extraordinary level of consciousness, particularly in, whales, elephants, dolphins, like these larger, more advanced species. Whether they question the nature of their reality, I'm not sure. Like, do they question who am I and what am I doing in this world? Like if a whale is committing suicide, is that an instinctual thing? Is that I think cats sort of do that as well. I think the other side is, I think it's possible that for our leap to consciousness to occur, it came with a disconnection. So animals also have superpowers. If we as humans think about how animals work, like how do whales navigate? How do turtles come back to the same beach every year? How do birds migrate across the world and navigate? Like we don't actually know how that works. So as compared to humans, like certain animals have these like incredible, like they know a tsunami is coming. Animals will flee. Like so Rupert Sheldrake talks about this a lot. And there's a book he wrote about like dogs that know their owners are coming home. And they did all of these experiments, and dogs would know their owner was coming home, even like the owner hadn't left the office. Like it was just an intention. Like there is no way that there was no routine, there was no hearing, but they would go to the window and wait for their owner when the owner had was leaving the office and knew but there's no way the dogs could have known in the material ways that we view the world. And so there's this connection that certain animals have with a knowledge or an understanding, this deeper frequency, maybe you can call it that, of the world that we are disconnected to. And then if you start looking at to your point on consciousness and what we're generating, creating our own reality, and you start looking into the quantum physics aspect of things, there's so yes, we're made of stars, but equally we're made of literally nothing. If you keep going into an atom, you keep going, there's nothing there. And all there is a probability function that coalesces when we view it. And so there is something and everything going on everywhere all at once. And we have the ability to perceive certain aspects of that. But certain aspects, ultraviolet light, we can't perceive. Now we can do experiments to figure out that it exists, and we can work with that technology, but we can't perceive it. And so we're sort of gradually increasing our perception of the quote unquote non-material realms, if I can call it that. And from my perspective, I think, they exist, and I'm fascinated by this sort of the quote unquote science of consciousness that's emerging with a lot of the experimentation being done around it. Yeah, anyway. And then I think the alien rabbit hole is fascinating. Because if you keep going down the alien rabbit hole, you get to consciousness. And that's it's like a paranormal phenomena, which is a potentially, just a product, creation of a mass, a collective unconscious, effectively, or a collective consciousness that's creating this experience of the world.
There are so many potential solutions to that old paradox. One thing I'm fascinated by are CAPTCHAs. You get a CAPTCHA, and you're supposed to click a little tick a little box that says "I am not a robot." And my instinctual thought is always, how the fuck would I know if I was one? How can I ever know if I'm a robot? This is philosophy 101. I cannot know. It's back to the basic notion of I think, therefore some thinking is going on somewhere, but I can't really prove anything else. So how the fuck would I know if I'm a robot? It's part of my French.
I never thought about that. That's so true. I'm never going to be able to do a CAPTCHA again. without thinking.
So another point is the idea that so a little bit touching on the mind creating reality and like the idea of consciousness. Do you know anything about like sort of the idea that the brain might make decisions about 300 milliseconds or something, but before it actually hits into consciousness, and then this gets into the implications of, does free will actually exist? Any thoughts on that?
It's just a fascinating conversation I've had with someone recently. We've been having a very deep conversation about the nature of free will and whether it exists. And yeah, I've heard about this research. I think it's fascinating. I've been diving a lot into the work of Carl Jung in the last few months. And right now I just started reading this book, which is like the letters between Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli, who was a quantum physicist. They actually co-wrote a book together. Anyway, and then someone published a collection of their letters. I think it's fascinating. But I guess the conversation I've been having around free will is like, I have no idea. I mean, at the end of the day, but I think it's possible. I think we have like certain strategic like directions in our life. And, from a Buddhist perspective, they might call it dharma. In Taoism, they might say you're in harmony. You're basically in line with the Tao. I think in the West, we call it purpose. And I don't know, I think my experience of the world is that each of us, there is some sort of pre-programmed life for us in some way. And then whether we have the ability to influence that or not, I don't know. Like, one argument might be that, which I've thought about, is I think sometimes maybe there are like certain points along the way where it could be completely random. And so maybe there is this sort of like random spectrum of outcomes, and, it could be this way or this way, and it's a 50-50 probability and it's just random. So, I mean, that doesn't necessarily help with free will. But then I think there is also this aspect of being able to do the work, really getting back in touch with ourselves and getting back in line with the Tao, coming back to consciousness, and then being able to, from that really centered central point, actually being able to influence things and influence our role in the world, or at least be completely in line with it. And maybe we can't influence our life, but we can influence our experience of that life. So we may not be able to control our external circumstances, but we can control our emotional response to them. And that comes with a whole host of things, of like challenges with trauma and subconscious and all of these things. So I don't want to bypass and say, oh, you can just choose to be happy. Like, I'm not saying that. It's far more complicated than that. But I think we have the ability to maybe work internally to change our emotional response to things. And a book that comes to mind, which people might find interesting, is a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning, which is about his time in Auschwitz, which I know is a very challenging topic for many people, including myself. And I really found that book I read it, I remember March 2020, standing in the airport, like could not put that book down, despite the nature of the content. And his whole message is, okay, we might not be able to control our reality externally, but we can choose how we respond to it emotionally. So that's just some of the thoughts I've been having around free will lately. But
the Western philosophy that comes to mind is Stoicism and the Marcus Aurelius, and I think he called it being in line with nature, or being in line with your nature, or something like that. It's very akin to these Buddhist thoughts. We had some other thoughts.
Thinking in that era came out of, because there was deep connections to India, and there were also deep connections to Egypt. So sort of the Egyptian mystical traditions and the Indian mystical traditions were coming up to, which predate like the sort of Roman philosophy. It's sort of, there's this like one thread that like seems to come through.
Yeah, that's the pretty part. I mean, Hinduism, I think Hinduism gets a pass too often, though, for being this mystical, nice religion with only nice people who want no possessions and stuff. But the caste society, like work your ass off and maybe you'll get a better life next time, that's like the most assholey policy ever. Like it's worse than inflation even. we're the elites and you're not, and that's the way it is. Hope for a better chance in the next life. That's pure evil.
I don't know if it's evil. I think it's, I don't know. That's another good question, the nature of evil. A great philosophical question. I think it's like the religious expression of what was once a core spiritual truth. And the same with like all of the religious institutions and then the humans that ultimately practice those cultural practices. So if you read the Bhagavad Gita, it can be very triggering because it talks about caste mixing. It talks about, okay, if people are not in line, then there's caste mixing as like, that's the worst thing that can happen. And so that's like a product of its time. And, what the Buddha did was really in part a reaction to the caste system. And so Buddhism was, in a way, it's like the successor to Hinduism, and is much more like ascetic, much more probably more in line with Stoicism. I have to say I'm not, much more about Stoicism and sort of Roman philosophy than I do. It's an area I'm looking to learn more about. But certainly in Buddhism, you don't have the caste system. It's very different. Whereas Hinduism, okay, people really disagree with me on this, but like from my perspective, Hinduism got too caught up in the ritual and the trappings of spirituality as opposed to the heart of spirituality. And the Bhagavad Gita talks about this, that ritual is not like, if you're relying on ritual, you're out of touch. Like ritual is sort of like not the core of spiritual connection. And Buddhism sort of tried to come back, and Buddhism has gotten lost in many ways. But I totally agree with you that the modern the way that Hinduism got expressed in society was like not positive in many ways.
No, well, isn't it what always happens, that a very individual spiritual experience, maybe there's something about that in the base layers of these religions, but as soon as they become organized, they're this collectivist bullshit institution instead somewhere down the line, and it just gets ugly after a while. I think that's what happens anyway. Back to the consciousness thing, because this is the one of the reasons why we bring it up is because we had a conversation with Jeff about the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness, and then we had sort of a follow-up episode with Volker from Germany, who had talked a lot about this, how there can be no free will because of the just the arrow of time. So it's not only the lag in the 0.3 second lag in your conscious experience, but it's also the simple fact that for you to choose whatever neurons that happen to pop into your brain, you would have to have like a soul outside of that brain making those decisions, because the biological cannot be separated from, like, who would be the choosing entity? And so that sort of presupposes that there's something outside of yourself making those decisions. However, this is a thing that I can't stop thinking about. Quantum entanglement might solve that. If you've heard of quantum entanglement, right? So like particles can be entangled over space, over vast distances, but they can also be entangled over time. So is there a way for a particle to be entangled to the past in order to make a decision for you in the future, so that your brains, the neurons in your brain are somewhat feedbacking back and forth in time in order for you to have free will?
I think quantum entanglement is, and this is why the whole, like, there was this such intellectual leap happening in Germany. My mom's German, actually, but happening in Germany in like the 1920s, or I think it was the 20s, really, around quantum, earlier than that, but quantum physics effectively. And it just changed the entire paradox of how we understand reality. And yet none of that has really filtered into our ordinary understanding of how we view the world. I think, like, if you think about quantum entanglement, like the entire universe across the entire space of time could be quantum entangled, because if it all started at like one point, like effectively it's all quantum entangled. And another way that you might call, okay, it's like ways, I think about it like the universe is connected in ways we don't understand. Like maybe at some point in the future, we will figure it out the same way we figured out radio waves and spectrum and frequency and all of that. Maybe we'll figure it out, but right now we don't understand it. But I think there is enough evidence that there are ways the universe is connected whether it's past and future, whether it's like across space, across time, that we don't understand. And there are proposals like what's called a noosphere, noosphere, which is this proposal. It's effectively the ether. Like, we used to have 5 elements, earth, wind, fire, and water, and the ether. Now, scientific theory has figured out that we have 4 states of matter. We have solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. But it sort of got rid of the ether. And yet, if you bring back this concept of an ether, of something that connects everything in a way we don't necessarily understand, it actually sort of potentially starts to fill in some of those gaps in our understanding. And what that is, I don't know. I think the way you explained it is super interesting, that there are like previous versions of ourselves that are influencing our decisions today from a quantum perspective. Like, that's fascinating. Yeah, there's called the Institute of Noetic Sciences in the US, IONS. They have this big conference in a couple of weeks, the Science of Consciousness, which has like fascinating speakers, which I think I will watch some of remotely if I'm able to. Yeah, the other, Rupert Sheldrake calls it a morphic field, like morphic resonance field, and that you can like start creating and influencing these morphic resonance fields. So there's a lot of like different ideas around the noosphere or the morphic resonance field or consciousness, which I'm just learning about. I think it's like fascinating.
Here, so we have to wrap up within the next 25 minutes or so here. So maybe we should start gearing slightly towards a conclusion to the conversation. But I know we'll have to do this again. Great to connect on so many different levels here. I really liked the Jung and the Viktor Frankl there. I've had a whole journey with Jung through Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning. I've been doing a whole series on that with Rob Breedlove lately, and that book is just something totally different. I don't pretend to defend the guy on it, like what he does publicly these days, but some good stuff there about the whole kind of meaning angle. So we might have to dig into that again another time, but. I just wanted to get back a little bit to what are you and I guess ego death. Actually, we never got into the name of ego death. So that'd be a good one if you could explain that.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. We had this idea around creating the fun name, and I'll tell you a little bit more. And then what's been fascinating after we named it Ego Death was sort of we're like, well, let's just see how it goes. It's pretty controversial, but and it's been great. And there's like the meaning has unfolded over time almost. So the idea came really, we were thinking about this transition we're going through in the world from a very centralized, model of society of money to something that's decentralized, and like this big shift that was happening and how difficult that would be. And so we're sort of like thinking that's sort of what we wanted to represent, was like this huge, shift where we're going from sort of each thinking we're an individual to being part of something bigger than ourselves, being Bitcoin and contributing to that, from a very centralized ego-based model to something that's decentralized, community-oriented. And so as we were talking about this sort of concept of ego death came up, of like, we're having to shift from being an individual to being a collective. And so that's kind of really where the name came from, from the background of psychedelics and meditation and these experiences that are very, very profound of going from this individual ego consciousness to, experiencing collective consciousness or pure consciousness. But what's unfolded is like these layers of meaning in it. So then we think about Satoshi, creating Bitcoin and then anonymously and leaving as sort of this ultimate act of ego death, that there was no ego involved. He wanted nothing from it. Like, he has never, extracted a Satoshi from his savings. And so that's one aspect. And I think that's, there's something that's so special about Bitcoin that can't be replicated. Like no other chain can ever basically, at some point, but like for that to really happen, like that's such a special thing about Bitcoin. Then we also think about ego death as you're breaking away or releasing the fixed ways in which you see the world and seeing it as it truly is. So, and I think that's so related to Bitcoin, because you're actually having to question all of your ways that you see the world, give them up, like release the neurons in your brain, if you like, and to see reality as it truly is and be able to see something so different. And we use it as sort of an internal guide. We try and it's not possible all the time, but we really try and sort of have this like no ego, no bullshit approach. Sorry, excuse my language. And that's what we look for in founders. It's not always, all of us are human. We do our best. We try and fail, and that's okay. But it is sort of like a nice guiding principle that we try and operate as a team. We try and do things together. We support each other. And so it's sort of been that, so it's multi-layered and still kind of uncovering it, I would say.
Yeah, this is fascinating topic. We've been talking to other guests about this, and I just can't help, because I think it's my skeptic nature that brought me to Bitcoin. So, and my skeptic nature tells me that there's something off about this whole Satoshi being this messianic figure that did the ultimate act of self-sacrifice. I mean, as much as I love that story and I wish it to be true, we have no idea of knowing whether that it's actually true or not. Satoshi could have just been hit by the bus and died the day after he sent this last message, or Satoshi could still be around and be a nym, and maybe he mined the next million Bitcoin and he ran away with those. Like, there are so many other possible futures here, or possible like explanations to that story, that I have I think there is some danger in painting this picture of this egoless human being. This is the slay your heroes thing. Like, even Satoshi would have to be someone we are willing to sacrifice on an altar for the sake of the idea, rather than the person. That is, to me, that's like the core. Nobody cares who Pythagoras was as a person. Everyone cares about his equation. So I think that's sort of how we ought to view Satoshi as well. Do you see a danger in this, like viewing Satoshi's sacrifice as that, when there's not 100% proof that it actually was a sacrificial thing?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I hadn't necessarily thought about it like that. I guess I have definitely, so I think that's all very valid, and maybe I will shift the way that I view things. I definitely have thought, if Satoshi came around now, and he might be who knows what he's going to be like. And now I think the beauty of Bitcoin is it's sort of beyond him. Like, if he came and he wanted to try and change things, everyone would be like, no. And he doesn't have that control. So yeah, I think like what he created sort of now is beyond himself, regardless of maybe the intention. Maybe it's the CIA that created it. I mean, I've heard all sorts of some government, maybe it's China. Like, I don't know if I believe those, like, well, I don't know.
Aliens.
Who knows?
Yeah.
I think that's, we do talk about, I think it's something we do talk to investors about. We do, I think, have to be also thoughtful around that there are still risks in Bitcoin, and it's not this infallible. So I think what you said is really important, like killing our heroes, constantly questioning, constantly being skeptical, because I think it's so easy to fall. It's so easy to sort of like get stuck in one way of viewing the world. So appreciate the challenge on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and we're only human. Everyone does it. Like, if and Bitcoin fits this. Like, it acts so much as an explainer for all that's wrong with the world. Once you view the world through a Bitcoin lens, everything makes sense. Okay, this is why we have overconsumerism. This is why we have more and more draconian laws and totalitarian states and all this. Oh, this is why there's corruption. This is why people are greedy. Like, all of it makes sense. This is why we're bad for the planet and the environmentalism and stuff. Like, all of it makes sense when you view it through these goggles. So it's very easy to get your view of what Bitcoin is, like, to be set in stone at some point, and then you think it's that, and then all of a sudden it behaves differently than you expected I think that's what happened to some of the people back in the fork wars and stuff. They had this view of what it was, and then it didn't behave as they thought it would. And that's where I think the ego dropping comes in. Like you need to drop your ego to rid yourself of your own narrative of this. I think to a certain extent, this whole spam on the time chain thing that has emerged as an issue now. This last year in Bitcoin has sort of changed my views on what this thing is and how robust it is, and that it, like, I'm not necessarily so happy with ossification as I was before I saw the spam attack. Like there could be things that we still need to solve, or there are things that we still need to solve. So yeah, I don't really know where I stand. I'm trying to figure it out, like if this is best treated by being ignored or by actively fighting it. But we need to stay vigilant. That's the only thing I do know, because complacency is, if anything, it's complacency that will kill Bitcoin. Like to me, that's the only attack vector. We always did it to ourselves, and if we kill Bitcoin, we did that to ourselves too. I truly believe that.
Yeah, I love that. Like constantly working at staying open-minded. It's like takes constant work. I feel like you constantly.
Yeah, because my favorite quote on open-mindedness is from Terry Pratchett, who said, like, the problem with an open mind is that people will come along and try to put stuff in it. So I think there's a lot to that. I think open-mindedness is kind of worthless if you're not intellectually honest and like willing to rethink like second and third thoughts about stuff, and like to constantly juggle. Do brain gymnastics. They're good for you.
All right, I think we might be coming to a semi-natural end to this conversation. So Andi, is there anything else you'd like to mention, or perhaps to direct our listeners towards if they'd like to find out more about you or Ego Death Capital?
Not specifically. No, I'm not a huge active Twitter user. My business partners are much bigger on Twitter than I am. Our website, egodeath.capital, has a little bit more about us, our portfolio companies. But I try and stay in the background and let our portfolio companies, they're the ones that are really like doing the work out there. So you can go to our website and view what they're doing, which is really what's interesting. If you want to learn more about sort of, I guess, what the companies are doing in the world.
Fantastic. So, Andi, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, we've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time now. Great to finally have it. And I look forward a lot to continue the conversation in real life whenever we meet the next time.
Likewise, it's been a lot of fun. Covered some interesting topics. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again, Andi. So this has been the Freedom Footprint Show. Thank you for listening.